Friday night in a packed saloon, lantern light burning low and amber, every table crammed full. The air hung heavy with tobacco smoke, and the raw tension of men who had drunk, past the point of caution. A piano trailed off note by note in the back until silence swallowed it. Then came the sound that froze the room, a heavy fist striking a woman's face, slamming her against the rough planked wall. 40 hardened men, cowboys, riders, gunmen who had faced death on the trail, sat motionless, watching. She stayed pressed against the wood, blood seeping from a nail wound in her shoulder she hadn't yet felt. Her eyes were not on the man who hit her. They looked past him, past the frozen crowd, straight to the door swinging open. The man who stepped inside wore a dark hat pulled low. A warrant hung on his name, but his gloved hands stayed visible, catching the lantern glow. He moved with calm purpose, the kind that said he had already decided how this night would end. The woman reached slowly into her coat pocket. "Hold that image. We are going back 3 weeks. Welcome to the Western Legend Stories. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. We bring powerful tales of the frontier every week. You don't want to miss what happens next." 3 weeks earlier, St. Louis in early October. 833 carried the scent of the muddy Mississippi and raw ambition. Eliza Voss had worked 6 years at Marchman & Sons Mercantile. The last 2 she kept the real books, fixing discrepancies others missed, all while the name on the door took the credit. At 31, she had buried her mother that spring, and now carried no remaining ties. Practical by nature, she lived by numbers, not sentiment. A letter arrived from Jonas Reed of Dodge City, Kansas. A rancher with 160 acres, he sought a wife of steady character. His words described land, fences, and expected yields rather than flowery promises. Eliza appreciated the honesty. They exchanged 4 letters. In the last, Jonas mentioned Harlan Crew with careful flatness, something about financing. That didn't quite add up. She filed it away. Things that didn't balance always mattered. She packed a single carpet bag, her grandmother's small leather notebook she called the Quaderno, 2 dresses, her father's bone-handled knife, and a secret copy of the mercantile accounts. On October 15th, she boarded the westbound stage. Dodge City announced itself first by smell: cattle, smoke, and endless Kansas dust. Eliza stepped down expecting Jonas Reed. Instead, a man in a gray suit with a gleaming watch chain greeted her. Harlan Crew introduced himself, hat held politely, yet calculatingly. He informed her Jonas had died of fever 9 days earlier. Eliza noted the small lie in the timing. He presented a loan document, $340 against Jonas's land, property reverting to Crew Land and Banking Company upon death without heir. The signature looked real, but the date came after Jonas's. Last letter. Eliza read it twice, then asked sharp questions about interest rates, witnesses, and where the transfer was recorded. Crew's calm shifted beneath the surface. He offered her temporary cleaning work at his hotel and hinted at return passage east. Eliza took the job. She needed to be inside that building. On her second night, a stranger entered the dining room. Men grew quiet. The wanted poster outside the sheriff's office bore the name: Cole Devereaux, assault and property destruction, $200 reward. He wore dark gloves and a once fine coat. His gaze met hers once, knowing, measuring her situation before looking away. That night, while cleaning, Eliza picked the cabinet lock. Behind the ordinary hotel ledger lay a second book. 13 property transfers over 11 years. Each followed the same pattern: loan, death by fever or accident, swift transfer to Crew's company. Jonas Reed was listed as the 14th. The final transfer date remained blank. She copied every entry into her Quaderno by lamplight, replaced the book, and returned to her room. 13 names, 13 deaths. One pattern, one author. Eliza kept working, her mind turning the numbers like entries in a ledger that refused to balance. Crew's behavior changed on the 5th day. His face stayed pleasant, but small pauses and probing questions revealed his unease. Did she have family back east expecting letters? Had she written anyone? Was Dodge City suiting her? Each inquiry tested how alone she truly was. On the 6th day, he dismissed her from the cleaning work. The rooming house suddenly needed her space, too. By nightfall, she slept in the livery stable, Quaderno open across her knees. She needed one thing above all: a legal authority, whose stamp did not belong to Crew. Judge Aldous Crane of the 3rd Circuit was due through town the day after tomorrow. She had 48 hours. Cole Devereaux remained in town. Men watched him carefully. He moved with quiet confidence, gloves never removed. Twice more their eyes met across the street or in the hotel. Each time his look carried recognition, as though he already understood the trouble she had stepped into. On Thursday evening, Eliza went looking for Sheriff Reeves, Quaderno hidden inside her coat. The sheriff was never in his office on Friday. Nights, another pattern she had learned. She carried her evidence to place in official hands before the judge arrived. What she had not planned on was finding Harlan Crew inside the Kansas Cowboy Saloon. Voice raised in anger. The moment she entered, every head turned. A woman alone in that place at that hour was rare. Crew saw her and paused only 3 seconds, long enough for the room to watch, short enough to recover. He began speaking loudly, painting her as a troublesome woman making false claims about private hotel records and invalid contracts. His words built a public story before she could tell her own. A frontier town, the first voice often won. Eliza felt heat rise in her face. But she kept her voice steady. She had spent years reading men who thought their expressions hid everything. Crew's hand moved, not yet toward her, but in a gesture that silenced the room further. The tension stretched tight as a new rope. She reached for the inner pocket of her coat where the Quaderno waited, heavy with 13 copied deaths and dates that told their own cold story. Crew stepped closer, his calculation turning to threat. "Women have no place interfering in men's legal affairs here," he declared for the crowd. "Best you return east before more trouble finds you." The words were meant to end discussion. Instead, they hung in the air like smoke. Several men shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with narrowed eyes. In the far corner, Cole Devereaux set his cup down slowly. His gloved hands rested on the table, but his attention had locked onto the scene. Eliza spoke clearly, her voice carrying the precision of a bookkeeper who had found the error. She named the 13 men. She listed the suspiciously similar causes of death and the speed with which each property passed to Crew's company. Gasps and low murmurs rippled through the saloon. Crew's face tightened. He called her claims wild and dangerous. Outside, the night wind carried piano notes and the distant lowing of cattle. Inside, the balance of power in the room had begun to shift. Eliza stood her ground, blood still drying on her shoulder from the earlier blow, the nail wound now burning. She knew the next moments would decide everything. Cole rose from his table. The movement was unhurried, yet every man present felt the change in the air. He did not speak immediately. He simply walked forward until he stood between Eliza and Crew, those dark gloves catching the lantern light once more. The same hands the room had seen when he first entered town. Crew's eyes flicked to Cole. Recognizing the name, the reputation, the unpredictable element now standing in his way, the saloon held its breath again. Cole Devereaux's voice cut through the thick silence, low and steady. "That's enough, Crew. The lady has something to say. Let her finish." Harlan Crew's practiced calm cracked. He had built his empire on quiet deaths and uncontested papers. A public challenge from a man with a warrant on his head was the last variable he wanted. Yet the entire room now watched, drawn by the unfolding drama. Eliza seized the moment. She pulled the Quaderno from her coat and held it high enough for those nearest to see. Page by page, she laid out the pattern. The loans, the swift deaths, the transfers. Jonas Reed's entry sat unfinished, because she had arrived and refused to disappear quietly. Her words carried the weight of careful arithmetic, the same discipline that had kept mercantile books honest for years. Several ranchers who had lost neighbors to sudden fevers began murmuring. A man at the back stood up, then another. Crew tried to regain control, calling her a liar and accusing Cole of being a wanted criminal. But the tide had turned. The first version no longer held. Cole spoke again, addressing the room. "I rode through here 3 years back and saw Crew's methods. I destroyed some of his rigged papers and put a man in the dirt who tried to stop me. That's why my name sits on that board. But tonight I'm standing for what's right. This woman came west with honest intentions. Crew took everything from her intended husband and meant to do the same to her." The saloon erupted. Punches flew as some men sided with Crew and others with justice. In the chaos, Crew lunged toward Eliza. Cole moved faster. His gloved fist connected solidly, dropping Crew against the same wall where Eliza had been struck earlier. The banker crumpled, blood on his lip. Sheriff Reeves finally appeared, drawn by the noise. Eliza handed him the Quaderno. Judge Crane would arrive in the morning. But the evidence was already in official hands. Crew was arrested on the spot, his empire of stolen land and hidden ledgers exposed. In the days that followed, Jonas Reed's property was secured for Eliza. She chose to stay in Dodge City, proving as capable with ranch ledgers as she had been in St. Louis. Cole. Devereaux remained as well. The warrant was eventually cleared once the full story reached proper authorities. Their shared glances across the dusty street slowly became something deeper. Two careful souls who had learned to trust through danger. The woman who once reached into her pocket in that packed saloon now reached for a future she had fought to claim, and the man with the dark gloves and quiet purpose stood beside her, no longer alone. That is how justice came to Dodge City, on a night when 40 men finally chose to move. If you enjoyed this tale of courage and frontier justice, make sure you are subscribed to the Western Legends Stories. We bring stories like this every week. Drop a comment and tell me, sitting at one of those tables that night, would you have been the one to stand up? I read every single one. Hit like, share with fellow Western fans, and I'll see you in the next legend.